Hello, everybody. Thank you guys so much for coming out today. The weather has not been exactly ideal for summer evening, but we really appreciate you joining us. And yeah, this is the first of our Dice Forum series, and we're kicking off with Juba, who I recently actually had the fortune to meet serendipitously because we ended up playing at the same Black Lives Matter fundraiser a few weeks ago. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to having a little chat with you about your, creative journey and your experiences as a DJ and as a filmmaker. So yeah, thanks again for being here. So I think, yeah, come on, love. No, all good. I think when we first chatted, you mentioned that you're from Essex in the UK. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm from Essex. I am.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And I guess what I'm interested in is just growing up in Essex and sort of, I don't know, when did you maybe realize that you were sort of interested in becoming a DJ or putting music together? How did that sort of come to you? Was that something that was a result of your experience living there? Or does that come from your relationship to music, or how did that sort of emerge?
Essex has nothing to do with my music taste at all. If you know Essex, no, it's not like a mecca of music or musical people. Me coming into DJing was actually very random because I think I'm more of a dance person. I've danced, especially to Afro beats kind of music for a very long time. And growing up in a Nigerian household, obviously, sort of music from Nigeria, West Africa was played quite a lot. But it was actually very random. At university, I hosted a lot of parties. And so I always thought I'd be more of a party thrower, promoter. And then after university, I basically was a typical unemployed student who couldn't find a job for a lot of many years. It's quite random. I just was unemployed after university, and I spent most of my uni time sort of dancing around, doing sports and running club nights. And then you kind of get into the real world and you're like, shit, I need to get a job. Because, yeah, you need a job. And I was just really unhappy for a long time. And then I was like, I want to have fun. I'm tired of being unhappy. And I was like, DJing looks fun, so I'm going to try and DJ. So that's basically it.
Nice.
And then I just kind of told a friend that I wanted to DJ. And she introduced me to a woman who taught me how to DJ. So it's really not that inspiring a story. There's no I grew up and was trained by, Jimi Hendrix.
Well, I think there's also, yeah, but I think there's something that's quite inspiring. And what year was this actually when you decided that?
This was 2015.
Okay.
Yeah. And so then I kind of got behind the decks 2016.
Cool. I mean, I don't know, for me, just the fact that your sort of choice to commit to having this as a new expressive form and then reaching out into the community, there's something quite inspiring about you being you finding someone to mentor you and kind of also introduce you to that process, because I think that that's something that perhaps doesn't always take place. Perhaps more in a male context, men are often indoctrinated into the practice of DJing or other sorts of practices, and those infrastructures are not always there for women or queer people or trans people. So that's really beautiful, and I just wanted to hold a moment for that, that's dope.
No, yeah, I mean, because I hadn't really thought of DJing as a career before I got into it. I wasn't necessarily very aware of the politics and the dynamics within the DJing or electronic music scene.
Sure.
So I was just I want to get into it, and then I realized whilst being involved that it was a harder place for up and coming, especially women who want to DJ, people of gender minorities, or I don't think necessarily race came into it as an issue just because of the music that I play. I started off playing Afro beats, so it's mainly black DJs who are playing that stuff because DJs of Nigerian heritage are in that scene, so it's more a gender thing as opposed to any other.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's really interesting, and I think that's something that, from watching your film, it seems like that was something that also is a larger conversation. Once you started getting more into DJing, how did your practice evolve? How did you develop a practice? How has that sort of come together over your time or like your journey?
So obviously I was taught to DJ by a fellow DJ friend, collective member called Mina. I guess for me, I just draw inspiration from people that I really like. A lot of the DJs that I really enjoy are quite, I don't know, transition heavy, and they kind of play one particular style genre, whereas I'm quite, I play loads of genres. Mm-hmm. So I think I've kind of learnt from people that don't necessarily mirror my style. But I think it's just a lot of like kind of, say copying, but essentially if you see something a DJ does and you enjoy it, you know, you kind of look over their shoulder while they're playing and then you go home and try it yourself. No shame in that.
Definitely.
Yeah. And I think also just being really open and like speaking to people, asking them for help, literally saying, hey, can you teach me how to do this? Then I think there's no shame in doing that.
Absolutely, you know, and it also just takes, you know, that sort of, it takes courage to do that though, and a lot of intention. I think that's also really, that's really cool. And it's I think maybe that's kind of just speaks to your vibe a little bit as well. So that's dope. But as you sort of started to begin like developing that practice and also like, I guess, sort of like developing like not really resources but like getting more resources from your community as far as learning and exchanging things in that context, like as you sort of started to grow as a DJ, like how is that now, because you have a various range of kind of things that you do as a DJ, right? You play radio, and you also play like nightlife, and I think you also mentioned festivals in the past. So is that sort of you know, has there been any particular sort of switch in your approach, for example, between like club nights and radio, or how do you sort of, do you have different energies that you try to engage or like? Yeah,
when I think in the radio gives me more space to just play things that I wouldn't play in a club, because for me, when I'm in a club, my intention is to make you dance. So fast switches, high tempo, high energy music is what I tend to focus on. Mm-hmm. My music taste has also changed quite a bit, sort of just, you know, having drawn inspirations from living here, inspirations from other DJs. But then when I play my radio shows, I have quite a large range of musical influences that I do enjoy, but there's some things that just don't work on a dance floor for me. Yeah. And I do enjoy to kind of create that distinction, and it enables me to, explore and play songs that you won't hear from me on a dance floor, but I still do really enjoy. In a different way, you know, because there's something about, you know, hearing that heavy, 130 BPM and above. I know 130 BPM is not so high for some people here, but for me it is. Yeah. You know, it's a different sensation, I think, playing it out to sort of sitting down and wanting to listen to someone talk and play music at the same time as well. Yeah, so I like to keep distinctions.
Okay, so you also do a bit of talking on your radio show as well.
Yeah, I'm a talker.
Oh, I like that. That's cool.
Yeah, because I think I come from, I wouldn't say an academic background, but an academic background. So for me, and I studied history and Spanish, but history at university. Yeah. So I'm really interested in stories. I'm really interested in kind of exploring and researching as well. As much as I love DJing, I do find that I wouldn't be satisfied as just being a club DJ, because there's so much more to music and culture that you can explore and sort of dissect. And that's why I enjoy my radio shows, because it gives me a chance to, you know, talk into my own little wormhole and explore like different musical genres, different sounds. Like I did a show about the kind of highlife golden era in Nigeria last year for Nigerian Independence Day. Oh, wow. And it gave me an excuse to kind of talk about, you know, the Nigerian music industry in the 1960s and kind of what happened in the 1980s and kind of social issues like the Biafran War that happened and how that influenced music coming from the Igbo area as well. Wow. So it kind of gives me an excuse to, I guess, like geek out a bit.
But that's also really cool, because it just seems like a really intuitive and fluid way of bringing the cultural context into music, which sometimes, particularly in a club setting, is maybe lost, right?
Yeah, I think like coming from a Nigerian background, music is really integral to so much of our culture. That sounds really basic, but you know, music is played all the time, and you have different ceremonies and different occasions where music is played, and there's a history behind it. And I know all music has history anyway, but I think it's more integrated into daily life. Whereas I feel like, you know, when I'm in sort of, you know, the sort of Berlin club scene, it's like you've got the club, you've got club life, and then you have like separate life from that. And I don't know, I think there's such a cultural element to music, and you know, and it has such a wider impact and meaning within society, that I think it's a shame not to necessarily explore that, you know. And I like to kind of know the history and the ideas of what I'm playing, as opposed to just hearing the sounds and thinking they're cool.
Absolutely. No, I think that's it's sort of like a grounding practice. It's an anchoring practice, and I think that's super interesting. So I guess one of the things that, you know, that also is really cool about some of your practices, that as far as that, you know, interest in history and you being able to sort of tell these stories with your radio program, that's not so different from kind of what your project Assurance was, your film project, is it not? It's kind of contributing to the narrative of what's going on there. So maybe, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Should I explain about Assurance?
Please do.
All right, cool. So Assurance is a documentary that I made. I came up with the idea with my cousin, who's a videographer and a photographer. She's based in Nigeria, in Lagos. And, you know, she's a photographer and I'm a DJ. And we are both interested in, I guess, telling stories through our craft. And Nigeria is a great place for stories in terms of social movements and just society. It's something else. It really is. And so we just thought it would be a really good idea to explore a certain element of Nigerian, I guess, like youth culture, you know, kind of creative, expressive culture. And because in the UK and here in the UK, I'm part of a collective called Boko Boko, which kind of was started to, I guess, address the gender imbalance and help up and coming mainly female or predominantly female DJs, but like it's kind of more gender inclusive than just like only helping women. And the whole, you know, our whole focus has been looking at the fact that it's harder often for women to sort of move into the industry and also move up because of the male gatekeepers. So I had my interest in that. She has an interest as well. So we kind of came together and we decided to, you know, make a documentary about how it was for women who are DJing in Nigeria, because Nigeria is a very, very gendered society. I mean, the whole world is very gendered, but like in Nigeria, it's like men do this, women do this, and like you follow like a trajectory, and anything that diverges from that is like, you know, it's a pandemonium. I think that's a bit too much of a word, but like it stands out. It's kind of, you don't diverge from what you're meant to do, unless you're rich, then you can do what you want. But like because it's also very classist as well. So I thought it was just a place where you could really tell stories in a very honest way, because you just see how people are just very honest with how they feel and they don't dance around the point. So I thought it would be a good place to tell a story.
That's really cool.
Did I explain that? So basically women in Nigeria DJing. So, well, I want to explore that.
And yeah, well, I mean, it's really, I don't know if, actually it would be really, I think, good if you tell the crowd where they can see it if they haven't been able to.
Boiler Room's film platform for free is where it's hosted. That was a really weird way of saying the sentence. It's hosted on Boiler Room's platform for free, which is where they host films.
Okay,
yeah,
cool,
Boiler
cool.
Room for free. I can't speak English anymore. What's going on?
It's just one of them days, you know how it is sometimes.
God.
You know, this weather is over here threatening to rain on us, but we out here.
We're surviving.
Having our conversation.
With the dog.
So basically, if y'all haven't seen Assurance, it's, I mean, clearly you have the context now from Juba herself, but it chronicles sort of the experience from 3 different DJs in Nigeria. Sensei Lo, who is a radio producer, a DJ, as well as a nurse. Yin, who is a vocalist and a DJ, and Aizan, who is another DJ based in the Lagos scene. Yeah. And basically it's a series of sort of portraits or little vignettes where each DJ addresses their sort of personal experience in the scene and sort of the things that they come across as far as dealing with that sort of gender imbalance, and a little, you know, it also kind of illuminates a little bit of their own creative praxis and their approaches to creating, you know, space for themselves and being a part of that scene. So yeah, I think it would be really interesting to hear a little bit about your experience of like filming with each of them, and what was the process like of making this documentary in Nigeria, which is like seems like a very like lively place
Ooh,
as well.
lively.
Like, what was that like?
Lively to say the least. I always say when I go to Nigeria, it's like you step off the plane and your blood pressure rises immediately.
Oh
It's
my
just-
God.
It's like the heat hits you, the energy, the people, the noise. Like, I love Nigeria and / but it's a very intense place. Like, you're. However, no, when I go to the village, which is like out in the sort of the countryside, it's amazing. It's like therapy. But Lagos is like intense. There's, you know, a million cars on the like roads, and there's traffic for like 2 hours. The heat is intense. There's street hawkers calling you to buy food. There's someone shouting over there. There's a random tire on fire over there. It's crazy. It's fucking like, and then like, yeah. It's a very intense place. Like, for example, one time, this is a random story, but me and my cousin, we were just at a club one night, and then there was loads of police around, and suddenly the police just started shooting in the air, and then everyone just clears out. There's like a stampede, and me and my cousin were like, what the fuck is going on?
Oh my God.
And it's like apparently someone wanted to drive through the road, and they were like
Oh
rich
my
or something.
God.
But it's just so normal. It's just like, yeah, casually the police were shooting in the air, and then everyone carries on with life. But yeah, so filming in Nigeria, you kind of have to be really resourceful and learn to deal with stress, essentially, which is not necessarily too unique in terms of filming anything, but it's just times by 1,000. So, you know, you're trying to film for a day, and you've organised to meet I organised to meet DJ Yin, for example, at 2 p.m. And so I had a driver that I'd booked to like come and pick us up at 1 p.m. He turns up at 3 p.m. and he's like, sorry, ma, it's okay. I'm like, it's not fucking okay, because I've got someone to meet. But then there's me with my like British like timing, and I forget that I'm in Nigeria, and Lagos timing works in a different way. So it's like you kind of have to adapt to the environment. But when you come from like this quite, you know, a certain way of looking at time, and you go to another place and how they look at time, it doesn't always connect. So yeah, and then I get there, but then, you know, he turns up an hour late, and then traffic, you know, a journey that should take 20 minutes takes 2 hours, and she's waiting there, and it's like 5 p.m. and then we're trying to film, and then there's like traffic everywhere, and it was just really crazy. And very intense, but it happened. I mean, I cried so many times because when I get annoyed, I cry, and I was so frustrated at certain times. But it's funny because I'm like really frustrated, and my blood pressure's rising, and everyone there's like, calm down, like it's chill, it's fine. I'm like, no, it's not. But yeah, it was. So it worked out in the end. But you kind of just have to roll with the punches, and shit will go wrong. You know, I drove like 3 hours out to go and film another woman who's actually not in the film.
Wow.
So I'd like, you know, been trying to film her, and I tried to meet her like 2-3 times before. Every time I got to a gig, she just wasn't there. And then I literally drove out of Lagos to meet her. I got to her like freaking, I don't know, estate, and it turns out she was grounded. So she couldn't come out because she was grounded.
Was she like...
She's a grown-ass woman, but I don't know, it's Nigeria, so you can probably still be grounded till like 25.
Got it.
So yeah, it was very a lot of, you know, kind of having to problem solve and manage situations.
Yeah.
But also it was great as well, like it's not all gloom and doom. Or doom and gloom.
Did you know all of them before?
No, I didn't actually.
So you, like, how did you reach out to them? Did you just email or get in touch? How did the process go?
My cousin, luckily being my kind of like voice on the ground, she knew a couple of them, and just through talking, you know, kind of was able to get connected with other female DJs, because it's quite hard there in Nigeria. There's like one big like woman called DJ Cuppy, who's like a billionaire's daughter, and she's like the go-to DJ for everyone if they want.
I remember her from the film.
Okay,
with
yeah,
blonde
DJ,
hair,
yeah. But if you want to kind of find other, you know, women, it's even finding the women was actually quite a process, because it's not always that it's not as explicit as when, you know, it may be an EU or like North American club scene.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, how do they advertise there? Like, because advertising is a big part of that here. Like, obviously identity politics are a huge thing now. So I guess that's something that I'm kind of curious about. Is that sort of something where you would see them, like, or is it mainly word of mouth? Like, how does that work?
As in, how does identity politics play into
no
their promotion?
Like, identity politics I think is something that's really huge here now, and so based on like who you maybe are, you can get certain things, but in that, like, in that sort of in the cultural landscape of Lagos, where it's already quite gendered, as you say, like, is there, like, because as you're saying, like, your cousin sort of was your ear to the ground, right? So if you were just like a person who was going there who wanted to see a female DJ, is that something that is
I mean, I don't talk on the scene too intensely because I'm like not really like completely engrossed in it because I don't live there. But I guess you know, I guess the equivalent to identity politics getting you connections here will be just wealth and class and connections. Like if you're like the music scene in Nigeria can be very classist, and most of the most successful DJs and musicians come from very rich backgrounds. Okay. Or if they're not very rich, they at least have a certain level of like social privilege, because it's just the hustle to get in. If you're not like at least upper middle class, it's very hard. So it's just it's hard to say. Like, I guess if you know someone, there's like a small circuit of, you know, DJs who know each other, and I guess they're in a certain level. But there's one girl called DJ Yizon. She's basically a British born Nigerian like myself who lives there now, so her international status gives her a certain level of leverage, which has been like connected her to certain people. But for Sensei Lo and DJ Yin, I think it's just like hustling from the ground up, really. Yeah, it's hard to position yourself if you haven't got those connections. Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of interesting, this sort of discussion of like sort of class and all of that as the sort of mechanisms of gatekeeping which exist in that scene, because, you know, here we also have, I think that both race and class have their own sort of gatekeeping, you know, mechanisms here in Europe. And so it's quite, you know, it's just unique always to kind of begin to engage and think about how that's taking place in other places, and like, what are those structures? Is that like, you know, a result of like, you know, the sort of like colonialism, that there's such a sort of like capitalistic classist structure there? Like, I don't know if you can speak to that, but you are a historian. Yeah, I mean, I didn't study anything like that. No, because as you say, like, class works everywhere. Like in the UK, you have situations where in the creative industry, it's only the rich kids who can do the unpaid internship. So if you go into like, I don't know, journalism or film production, most of the people get into places are already quite middle class and upper. But there is still a certain level of access that can come to someone who isn't, you know, well connected to those structures, because they're just there's certain you know, projects and things have been implemented to try to at least address a level of classism in terms of, like, you know, whether getting into music scenes or you know, in the professional sense. In Nigeria, I mean, Nigeria is a very classist society, and you do see the relics of colonialism in of course, in the way people are, you know, the classism there. For example, you know, the second you are not black and you're like a foreigner but who's white or Arab, Asian, you are always automatically treated with respect there. Like, you just don't see poor white people in Nigeria. You don't see poor Asian people in Nigeria. They're always like wealthy. So there's a class barrier in terms of like race. And even though Nigeria is a black majority society, there's always that level of, you know, essentially an inferiority complex that Africans still have against you know, white people especially, or people who are from the, you know, the Middle East or, you know, Asia. Yeah. And then internally as well, classism is a real issue. Like, we still have situations, we still have house girls and house boys who are essentially, I say domestic servants, but, you know, these are usually children. Like in my family, they're, you know, they are there. Like, they're just children who are often, they're connected to your family, but they, you know, they work for you, and then you pay for their school fees, and it's just very normalized. But they tend to come from a poorer background than the family they're working with. So the classes in Nigeria, I think there's definitely colonial relics in it. It's just an accepted norm. And therefore it's the rich people who can do certain things. Yeah. And if you're not rich, it's just, you don't do certain things. Yeah. You don't get into those worlds. And yeah, I don't know if I answered that question, but I just thought it was interesting.
No, I think it's super interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think it's always interesting to talk about how, you know.
Yeah, and because even myself, like when I go to Nigeria, I'm just, by default of my accent and my passport, people refer to me as like, yes ma, like ma, and like, you know, and a person who's older than me will see me as of a higher class and therefore, you know, address me accordingly. Yeah, which is quite, and so things like that actually feed into careers that you'll go into and like how you'll be able to access certain scenes. Yeah, it's a really interesting discussion of like the sort of socioeconomic and cultural landscape in that sense, I think. But then, so one of the things that I particularly remember from the documentary was that because it's not like a profession for women to kind of like do this DJing thing, like some of the other, like for example, DJ Lo, she was working as a nurse. Like what
were you able to kind of gain any insight when you met with her about how she managed to sort of juggle all of those different professions? Or, I mean, I know it's addressed a little bit in the documentary, but just in your own conversations, like, you know, with her.
Yeah. I think, you know, in Nigeria, like professionalism, Nigeria is obviously a big country, it's generalizing, but especially in the southern states, education and professions are very, very respected. And unless you're rich, something like DJing or acting is just seen as like a hobby that doesn't really gain much respect within society. So a lot of people like Ian, Sensei Lo, are likely to kind of do or engage in careers like nursing or law, in order to almost justify and legitimize the creative side. You know, it's like, well, I'm a nurse, you know, you can't judge me, but I'm also, you know, a DJ. And it's also security, like, unless you are, as I said, well connected and wealthy, it's very hard to live off DJing. So you need that security.
Right.
Something like nursing, you know, gives that to an extent. In terms of juggling it, I mean, she eventually had to give up nursing because it was too hard to juggle.
Oh, wow.
But I guess it's the hustle, like, you know, you'll DJ on the weekends, DJ at night, be a nurse in the daytime, sleep when you can. It's the hustle. After
you sort of like completed the project, were you in contact with, did you maintain contact with those artists after?
Sure.
Have you been able to like develop relationships with them? Have they, I'm super curious about that as well.
Yeah, definitely. We stayed in touch. I mean, I found as individuals, they had their own particular stories, their own narratives that are quite enriching. So I wanted to stay in touch with them.
Yeah.
They're just great girls, really.
Yeah.
So why not? But yeah, I did a kind of follow-up series on Instagram, TV.
Oh, cool.
During lockdown.
Okay.
How cliche. Adapting to the digital, whatever.
Yeah.
And so that was quite good to catch up with them and see how it was for them. And also because I've done a lot of talks myself, but they haven't been involved in as many because like of them living in Nigeria.
Sure.
It was good to catch up and see what they're doing.
That's cool. So were there any sort of developments that they sort of mentioned, or as far as the scene, or as far as, you know, what's going on like with the whole situation? I mean, obviously most of the industry is quite dead at the moment because social distancing, but
telling me. I think it kind of sparked conversations in their circles as well. And I guess, as I say, because gender roles are so just taken as the status quo in Nigeria, it did cause people to, I guess, question things the way they hadn't, you know, especially within their circle. Because it's not as if everyone in Nigeria believes strictly in this is how the genders behave. There are people who are also questioning that standard. Yeah. So I think it was quite, encouraging for some people to watch it, and they kind of have followed on with them.
Yeah.
And also some people from some UK-based DJs have connected with like Sensei Lo and DJ Yuzen especially.
Nice.
And I see like connections forming there. So it's quite cool to see a continuation for them as well.
Another thing that I kind of wanted to touch on, which we kind of got taken away from, but I want to circle back to, is also with Yin, who is a DJ as well as a vocalist. One of the things that was super interesting about her practice was that she was writing songs and doing a lot of music around her experiences of depression. And I thought that was something that was really interesting because it speaks to, you know, the mental health, the experience of being a part of the, you know, mental health community in Nigeria. And I just thought that was a really interesting way of her bringing her creativity or her voice to that. And I wanted to kind of ask you what your experience of engaging with her on that was like. You know,
in Nigeria, or when Nigerians, or let me speak for Nigerians because that's where I can come from. You know, mental health issues are seen as like the white man's disease and a sign of like weakness kind of stuff. It's not, you just don't address mental health issues. And, you know, there's so many people when you go to Nigeria and they're called like madmen, or onyara in my language, like mad people. And it's like, oh no, don't talk to him, he's mad, or she's mad. And you look at them and you're like, I'm pretty guaranteed that you had the sort of like, you know, mental health issues, or you were suffering depression and you just weren't addressed in the right way. I've seen in my like personal family in Nigeria, I have like a cousin who, you know, he had speaking difficulties like growing up, and so once again dealing with disabilities as well in Nigeria, it's just not something people know how to deal with, especially like I guess more behavioral, or, you know, think ones that aren't as obvious. Like, it's not like, being immobile. If you can't speak properly, people sometimes just see that as you being dumb or whatever, And so this cousin of mine, you could just tell that people didn't understand him, and he's just been treated in a certain, like a problem. And I've seen the constant, the like deterioration of him over the years, going back to Nigeria every single time. And the last time I saw him, I was genuinely really shocked at the state he's in, because people just don't understand, kind of behavioural issues or emotional issues. And as I say, people are just left to deteriorate, and then they become mad people. And it's like, no, they're not fucking mad. They just haven't been looked after in the right way.
Right.
And so people like DJ Yin actually acknowledging that, I was quite like shocked in a way, because it's just, you hear stories about people and they're like, oh yeah, she was crazy, she was running around naked. It's like, why the fuck was she running around naked? Like, she wasn't just running around naked for the sake of it.
Reason.
Yeah. So I think talking to DJ Yin was good in that sense, because I guess there's a conversation that really needs to happen in places like Nigeria, but you have a lot of, people will dismiss, mental health issues as like possession. And so, because there's a very large, like, hyper-religious, you have like the hyper-religious, like, Islamic community and Christian community mainly, and they're both quite extreme in their approaches to religion. So things like mental health issues are also dismissed as madness or possession. And it's just something that needs to be spoken about. So I was glad that she spoke about that, actually, because and it was also interesting even hearing her talk about it, because her approach to it, I found, she was like, I was depressed until 2019, and now I learned to love myself and I feel better. And even for me, that's how she expressed herself, so I'm not going to tell her she's wrong, but it kind of, to me, I don't want to say showed a lack of understanding, because I guess I'm projecting my understanding of like mental health issues on her, but it kind of suggested, a kind of preliminary understanding of, like, its mental health issues, but even then not necessarily like a wide scope of understanding how they perform, how they I don't know, how they actually like present themselves. Yeah, because a lot of people don't just like switch on and off. It's like a continuous process. So I found even her approach of it about talking about it quite, I don't know, it was interesting to see how she viewed mental health issues. Even if I didn't agree, it was still useful to hear her talk about it. Yeah.
I want to ask about, like, did you ever get a chance to actually like play with any of them, or did you guys play together?
Yeah.
What was that like? What was the, like, was there crossover? What was the styles? What was the vibe? I want to hear all about it.
DJing in Lagos. I love Lagos, but I'm not going to lie, I don't necessarily want to DJ there again.
Really?
Nah, out that one party, I'm sure there'll be amazing parties to play at. Yeah, but you have technical issues, for example. I mean, we're very kind of spoiled in places like Berlin. Yeah. You get to a club and it's like, I want a Pioneer, this, that, and the other. Yeah, 4 CDJs, please. Newest model, that kind of shit. Whereas you go there and, it's like, in a lot of clubs, they have controllers. Most people use controllers as opposed to CDJs.
I noticed that in the film as well.
Yeah, because it's just more convenient. It's more cost effective. And it just makes more sense, because a lot of DJs, they have their stuff on their laptops, they can bring them to the club. So for me, having to adapt to that, like, I think there's a certain lack of adaptability to DJs like myself who grew up playing in places like London and Berlin.
Right.
So we're so used to just, the easy like USB sticking them in or whatever, or having all the equipment there. And so I rate that over in Nigeria. People are a lot more adaptable. And it just works out. And then you have a kind of I've become used to the DJ culture here more so, where you kind of have a DJ playing and everyone just kind of listens to what they're playing, and you don't really request songs as much.
Right.
And I've become that arsehole who like hates requests, but I will play them, because it's like, I'm here to play for people, innit? But like, I hate them. And you're playing a song and everyone's like, play this song now, the newest song. It's like, I fucking played it 2 minutes ago. Play it again now, I wasn't here. And it's like go away. And people as well in Lagos, in certain crowds, like the party I played was quite a mainstream Afrobeats party. People, as DJ Ayizan said, people love what they love. So like, they want to hear like the kind of the current songs, the old school songs, and like, but if you want to throw in something a bit random, they don't necessarily always connect with it, because so you just have to, there's not as much freedom, I think, to play what you want if you don't stick to certain genres. But it's up to you. If you want to play the genres, then mate, but yeah, it's a risk you might want to take.
Are there like any sort of like techniques or things that you kind of like learned or sort of like developed while you were playing there, from your experiences playing there, that you've taken back to London that work really well on like London dance floors? Or like, I don't know,
I feel like I should say something really deep, but
no, it don't have to be deep. It could be like the most simple thing, like
I guess adaptability. Not really, because I think within the Lagos dance scene, from what I saw, it's more about the hits, it's more about the songs, and a kind of like just having that track list that is faultless, as opposed to technicality. And the DJs that I like tend to be more technical, and I tend to like enjoy and see what kind of effects they use. So I didn't necessarily pick up anything. Okay. Really.
Yeah. But also, it's cool that it's kind of like still like localized sort of things that happen in a really local way that are sort of really rooted in that space. And that's kind of interesting too, in a way, I mean, especially, given that a lot of club culture is sort of becoming increasingly homogenous sometimes musically in certain environments, not all, obviously.
Do you think it's becoming, or do you think it has been more?
I think it's definitely been becoming.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's been a period of time where things were just, at least in Berlin, it just got to a point where it felt quiet, and then identity politics came and things started to open up again. But I think that London is also a much more dynamic place. And there's a lot of different cultural histories there. So it's in my experience, even as a student, I study at Goldsmiths and I also studied at the FU, and my experience in London was things were just on a much more dynamic, more engaging level, a lot more of a wider cultural critique, especially coming from a diasporic perspective. And that's,
I think that also comes from London's like literal demographic makeup. Like you have a large... But what I've noticed, obviously from my perspective or experience living here, there's a large like Arab and Turkish community here.
Yes.
But I don't necessarily see that reflected as much in the club sounds. That
Absolutely.
Whereas in London, it's like you see large like African, Caribbean, kind of communities, and you see that directly reflected in the club scenes.
Definitely.
But maybe I just don't frequent the right places here in Berlin. So maybe there is like a massive influence of the Arab and Turkish community, but I don't really see that. Yeah,
it's really interesting because I think that that's something that also plays out on the space or the landscape of the dance floor. There aren't like a lot of mainstream clubs that you necessarily see that community partying at. There are certain events which exist, particularly like the one I can think of that's been running the longest is takes place at SO36, and it's the Gehana. But this is something that is not as present, I think, as it should be, because it's not really accurately reflective of the cultural landscape here. So, I mean, there's a lot. I think that Berlin needs a lot of work in a lot of different areas, but that's a conversation for another day, I think.
Yeah. And also, I'm not of the Arab Turkish community, so I don't want to speak for them because I don't know.
For sure.
Maybe they don't want to be in German clubs. I don't know.
So absolutely. That's also very feasible.
To the experts.
Yeah. No, for sure. Well, let's see. We're just approaching the end of the hour. Wow. Thanks again for joining us for the first part of the DICE Forum Conversation Series. Thank you to Juba for being our guest today. And thanks to the rest of the DICE team. And thanks to you, our audience.
Thank you.